Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Janice Branch Hall. I serve as the Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging for the Pamplin College of Business here at Virginia Tech.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Kevin Thomas. I am a co-founder of the Race in the Marketplace Research Network.
Well, first and foremost, we just want to thank Dr. Kevin D. Thomas for being here and for providing a phenomenal talk. Your talk earlier was about the beyond the bottom line, business research as a liberatory practice. And we just want to spend a few more minutes diving a little deeper into the intersection of business research and this idea of liberation and social justice and equity that we talked about earlier. And this topic is very near and dear to my heart, but also to the Pamplin College of Business in our efforts to really connect what we do to responsibility. Like, we have the responsibility to prepare the next generation of students to go out and be good global citizens that make societal impact through the lens of social justice and equity and liberty. And so we just want to get started. Just a few questions
Yes.
for you. Can you just provide, for those who weren't able to join us today, can you provide a brief synopsis of your presentation, Beyond the Bottom Line, Business Research as a Liberatory Practice, and why this topic is important to the broader field of research?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. So I started the talk with really framing it as a conversation. As a critical scholar, I see that there's always knowledge in the room, and I want to make sure that that knowledge gets brought into the dialogue versus me seeing myself as an expert. That's going to show people what to do. And so that idea of letting this be a dialogue is very important. So the talk itself really centers on an idea of using a critical framework of research, which is often not utilized in business research, as a means of getting to a space of liberation or a space of collective liberation. And so what we did was, one, I talked about my own personal journey, what brought me to critical research perspective to begin with, and my lived experience as a darker skinned, larger, black, locked, pansexual man who didn't really see himself on TV and in media, and grew up in a space where I wasn't quite sure where I fit. And so what I found with my journey was it kept bringing me to this space of wanting to free myself, but also seeing how others that looked like me or others that were marginalized in some way were also experiencing that sense of marginalization. And that sense of using critical theory as a way of liberating ourselves, because that is the overall guiding force of critical theory, is that it's not simply doing research for research's sake, but research that is liberatory, that is a way of promoting justice, really resonated with me because of my lived experience. I wanted to start with showing that journey that I've had to critical research. And then from there, we took kind of a deeper dive into, well, what is critical research? What are its elements? How do we actually see it in comparison to other paradigms? And really the paradigms that are more dominant in what we see as business research, and a positivist approach and interpretivist approach. And wanted to really highlight, well, there are other ways, and one that's really, if you are interested in doing research with a social impact, here's another way to think about doing research. And so really wanted to lift that up a bit. And from there, I took us into a conversation that looked at the recent study that I did with some colleagues that looked at how race is implemented in advertising. And what we wanted to do with that research study is really spend some time conceptualizing what race is. We do feel like it's under conceptualized as a concept in business specifically, but just in general when we think about race. And so we went to fields that actually use much more of a nuanced understanding, have a much longer history of looking at issues of race as a way of trying to synthesize what's already there to how can we use this in a business context. And so using advertising as our context, we were able to really frame a sense of race as a social construct that is informed by discursive elements, that's informed by historical elements, and has these very specific material outcomes. So that gives us a structure of which now we can actually start to really understand how can we maneuver ourselves within this space of understanding how race is operating in the marketplace. And then lastly, we just kind of talked about the idea of what is RIM, I showed a video of our time in Paris, which was just a fantastic time of looking at research that studies raised and just having a space of coming together, celebrating our achievements over the time, and just being in a space where we feel held and known, which is really what race and marketplace is about. Really kind of have that sense of family, um, and yeah, just had a great dialogue along the way.
Awesome. Now, talking about your research, you talk a lot about liberatory practice. How do you, because a lot of your research focuses on issues of race, how do you demystify the issue of race? Because I know some people, when they see the word race, they get a little nervous. Well, how do we bust any myths associated with this level of research?
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely something where it you clench up a little bit when you hear it. Sometimes it's where's this going? Where's this leading? Am I going to be guilted into something? Is there going to be a feeling of us against them if we go down this road? And so whether it's in a classroom or whether I'm writing a paper, it's framing it as this is something that we have all inherited. And if we are going to get to the other side of it, then we're going to have to talk about it together. So this is a journey that we all have to go. We may have very different, we're all in this sea, but we got different boats, different resources on those boats, but we are definitely in that same storm together. And so if we're going to ever get to that sense of understanding how race is impacting all of our lives, it's going to require difficult conversations. And so framing it as, yes, it may feel uncomfortable, and that's part of what we need to do. And that's normal. And that's if you have something that you feel like there's tension and it's going to be, I don't know if I want to say this or what's going to happen. If you can create a sense of safety that it's okay, I see you as who you are, come as you are, and we're going to respect each other and respect each other's humanity, then you can have those tough conversations because there's an intent of, I'm not here to harm, and we can learn through this together. And if there is a sense of, oh, I've said something that's out of sort, we can attack the ideas but not the person.
Mhm.
Right? We can say, no, ideology seems to tell us that you're doing something here that may be a little inequitable. I love you as a person, but let's talk about this idea. I'm not attacking you. I'm attacking this ideology that you seem to be supporting right now. And so moving the conversation away from the kind of personal attacks and just interpersonal to bringing in that aspect of, no, we're also talking about structures here. And that's beyond our individual agency. But that's part of the conversation. We're also talking about cultural norms. And again, that's beyond just our individual agency. And so it's not a personal attack. This is about how are we living in a situated social field.
Mhm. Are there like tangible, practical ways that we can do that, like creating a psychologically safe environment so that people can feel comfortable, even if they don't have a lot of knowledge on these issues, that they can come and learn, but also be able to share from their own standpoint and not feel that maybe their standpoint is being attacked? Is there any tactics to kind of help develop that psychologically safe environment?
For me, it's simply allowing myself to be vulnerable. I need to model that behavior. If I can live it, if I can do it, and God knows anybody can do it. So if I can be someone who says, look, I don't have all the answers, I may say something that's out of sort as well, and please check me if I do. Again, it's not me on a pedestal saying this is how things are, and this is gold, and this is how it has to be. It needs to be a dialogue. It needs to be able to have a conversation and disagree in a way that again respects the personhood, but allows us to elevate the conversation around the ideology that may be driving that discussion.
Mhm. And it sounds to me a part of being able to be vulnerable involves a level of humility. And in the Pamplin College of Business, we are utilizing the cultural humility framework to help inspire students to be able to have these courageous conversations across cultures. So I
Yes.
appreciate that perspective because that is something that we are striving to do internally. Now, you're the co founder of the Race in the Marketplace Research Network and co editor of our book here. Yes. Race in the Marketplace Crossing Critical Boundaries. Now, how does your work and the work of your co authors and the work of this network contribute to advancing discussions on race and consumer culture?
Yeah. So really, I'll bring up two key points here, and kind of circles back to what I started with: is that race is under-conceptualized, right? That it's typically seen as just kind of a variable like any other variable. It's treated like age or gender or socioeconomic level. And all of these things are important, but they all are situated within culture in very specific ways and situated amongst each other in very interesting ways. And so our work tries to say that if we're actually going to make the work around race more productive and generative, we need to have more nuance and complex ways of understanding how race is operating in the marketplace. And so that means that, for one, it's not simply from a black-white paradigm or from a US perspective, that race and racism is a global phenomenon, and that there are certain ways that we see similarities across the globe, but there are very, very much ways that we see particularities based on locality and the culture that that locality is based in. And so we try to bring out those types of ways. So let's look at, are there universality things that we can see around how race is operating? And then what are those particularities within different aspects of whether it be a different race or whether it be different class or how it's intersecting with other parts of our identity. But how do we start to see race as a very fluid and contextual aspect of our lives and not something that's static, which doesn't allow us to really get to how it's really impacting how people are moving within the marketplace.
Awesome. Now, how has this work, how have you seen this work being integrated into academic curricula? Or have you seen it changing any sort of discourse in academia?
I think that there's certainly been movement. So I think someone brought up during the talk that we're starting to see some of these more reputable journals, what we would call the A class journals in the field, move into a space where they feel like they're more welcoming to this work. To go back to those paradigms, there's certainly been an entrenchment of more positivist work. And so if we're talking about race in these ways that don't really fit within that paradigm, that it's fluid and it's not something that can be measured once and then you know how it works and then you can go back to it. If it doesn't fit in that field where this is how rigorous research looks like, then we have to be able to broaden that scope out and say, no, there's other ways of doing the work. The critical perspective uses these types of ways to measure rigorous research. And so if those journals, which seem to now be open to that, are starting to shift their, who's reviewing these papers? Who's the editor over the journal? And are they actually committed long-term to these types of things? Or will it be when it's favorable in the marketplace as something that looks like it's popular for folks to do, then they do it. But when it seems to be something that's controversial, they pull back. So are these folks really committed to making sure that in the long term, this work is part of the canon? And I'm still suspicious about that. I do think there are folks that are, their heart's in the right place. I think we need to do some more outreach about what is critical research for some folks. I don't know if they really truly understand how it does apply in the business context because of just, again, that entrenchment of how things have been done in the past and how they see that it may not be as rigorous as these other ways. And so trying to do some education work there would be helpful. I know that there's been some serious issues around campuses and certain municipalities saying that you can't talk about certain things in the classroom anymore. And so now we're having to come up with ways of using coded language. And just to kind of quote Toni Morrison, this idea of racism as a distraction. And what I see there is that when we have these municipalities saying you can't do these things, now we're having to spend so much time trying to figure out a new way of doing it versus actually doing it, that we get put, the progress is postponed because now we're rethinking about, well, what does it mean if we can't say this word? What other word can we say? And if we can't do it in this instance, what instance can we do it in? And all the logistics of that takes away so much of the time that can be used actually doing the work. And so my concern is that, how do we get to a space where we don't have to worry about the distractions of the logistics of all of this and to really do the good work of critical work around race?
Mm-hmm. So, how can other higher education institutions or even corporate partners join your efforts?
We're more than open to folks that are willing to really examine, to have that humility that you talked about, and really examine themselves and see, well, how might they be implicated in their own historical practices in the ways that they've approached the marketplace, and looking at that and trying to change that structurally. And if they are willing to do that, we welcome their fold into the network and ways that we can hopefully help them get to a space where they're creating more equitable marketplaces. So we're welcome to anyone and everyone who has a willingness to at least try this new approach to life that we're calling the critical approach.
Okay, so your previous work has been featured in a ton of prestigious academic journals, such as the Journal of Public Policy and Marketing, the Journal of Consumer Research, and the Journal of Advertising. What key insights have emerged from your research that have the potential to really transform academia and industry practices?
I'm going to circle back again to the idea of what is race.
Mm.
What I and again, my research is really me search, as we talked about last night. It really is about trying to get a sense of who am I? Am I and based in this intersectional self that I call me? Um, how do I function in the world, and how do people respond to me, and why do they respond to me that way? And so what I find is that the more that I dig into those areas that are interested to me, the marketplace is very much connected. It's kind of part and parcel. We live in a space where consumer culture is how we express ourselves. So anytime that I do work that's connected to a problem that I see, that I've experienced, it's going to have relevance, broadly speaking, to corporations, to higher ed situations, and any type of exchange with the marketplace that we define it as any place where there's an exchange of ideas or commerce. And so that idea of really trying to understand race as a much more nuanced sense of the intersectional approach to race was something that I did with my dissertation work. And that was one of the first papers in the field of advertising specifically that used an intersectional approach. And so that was part of the movement to really bring about breaking down the silos between our sense of identities and, well, this is what Black people do, this is what women do, well, what about Black women? And so what does that, when we put those two things together, that's a whole different experience than if you just look at them in separate boxes. And so that even that in and of itself can have all sorts of implications of how do we market to certain groups. If we're talking about Black people, that means you need more than just one type of way of doing that. So it's breaking down this idea that there's just these kind of homogenous groups when we think of race or gender, that when we live at the intersections, which we do live at the intersections, we're going to have to be much more complex than that.
Now, one question that, again, when we talk about race, sometimes there's just this knee jerk reaction, especially in US context, to kind of freeze up or get a little nervous. So I would only imagine that you've received pushback or some challenging or critique to your work. How can you talk a little bit about that and how you've been able to overcome that?
Oh yeah, yeah. So my first conference as a PhD student, I was in Norway. So it was my first time overseas. And I was presenting, it was early stages of my dissertation work. It was one of kind of a exploratory study, and my dissertation looked at Black millennials and white male millennials and how these two male groups use the marketplace to kind of buttress their identities, to really make sense of how they wanted the world to see themselves. And what I had found was that the white men that were in the study had a much broader breadth of areas that they could explore consumption-wise. Right? They could consume rap music, they could consume country music, and that was all legitimate for them. Whereas the Black men had a much narrower focus of how they could consume and still be perceived as authentically Black. So I had one respondent who said that he really loved country music, but he would never tell his friends that because he loses his Black card if he told his friends that he listened to country music. And so when I went to Norway, I presented this work, and they just like, this has nothing to do with business. Why are you here? One of them actually sat down and said, "This is what you need to do," and he completely changed the right variables. Race was taken out, and thinking he's helping me. This is how you can actually move forward. And I'm just dejected. I'm like, why am I here? This seems to be, certainly there's something wrong with me and my work. It's not rigorous enough. Thankfully, I had a network back home, a kind of sense of family that could help me say, no, don't listen to him. This work is valid. These were folks that were titans in the industry. Jerome Williams was my mentor. It was a long-standing titan in the field of multicultural advertising. Jerry Henderson, also the same. And so these were folks that not just I respected, they were respected throughout the field. And so if I had their approval and their support, it was enough to keep me going. It wasn't enough to say that I didn't have doubts. It wasn't enough to say that, there were certain times when I thought, am I doing the right thing? But it was enough to let me take this next step and see what happens. And that made all the difference. It wasn't about, okay, I don't know what's going to happen 10 years from now, but I know I can at least finish this study and see what happens. I can at least submit it and see what happens. I can at least try to revise it and see what happens. Right? So just kind of keeping my eye on the next right thing versus trying to see what was going to happen in the long term kind of does keep me in a space where I think, oh, this is manageable.
So I just have maybe a few more questions, and then I'd love to open things up to our live studio audience here. Um, it's around the significance of our partnership, the Pamplin College of Business and Race and Marketplace Research Network, and how this partnership could contribute to advancing research on, responsible research on race, and how you see other potential possibilities that could come out of our potential not potential, our partnership. Yes.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I mean, it's just been fantastic. We're a small but mighty group. And so to be able to have access to the wealth of resources that are available to Pamplin has been immensely helpful for developing conferences and helping to do other programming that RIM puts on. And so that partnership just on a practical basis has been extremely helpful. But just to know that we have a partner that is championing what we're doing, that sees the value in what we're doing, that is saying, hey, here's a wealth of undergraduate and graduate students that are interested and want to take this to the next level with you. And so the idea that we don't have to go out and search for them, that they're just knocking on our partner's door and here they are, or the partner's saying, go there, here's their information, reach out to them. And so I've gotten several emails from students saying, how can we stay in contact, or would you mind reading this for me, or whatever it might be. And so that idea of the partnership is allowing them to grow just organically without having us really do much of anything but just be who we are and be present. Again, it's just a phenomenal way for us to be able to limit the use of the bandwidth that is limited that we already have. And so the ability to know that there's certain things that are just taken care of because we have this partnership. And there's certain ways that we know that we are trusted in this partnership that makes the job much easier. That what we talked about can be very difficult at times.
Absolutely. And so I'm thinking about students, or even staff members, community members, who are aspiring to do this level of work, to do this critical work, whether it's research, whether it's community organizing, so on. If they're pursuing something that's socially relevant, responsible, transformative, how can they get started? What does that even look like?
Speaking from my own experience, start with what you know, which is your lived experience. What are the questions that irk you? Like, what are the things that, I keep having this experience and it doesn't match with how I see myself, but it keeps happening over and over again. So I'm wondering what's going on here. What structure might be blinding people to the real me here? And so be curious about your own experience, because I've found that means that there's a whole lot of other people having that same experience. And so if you go down that road, you're not just helping yourself, you're going to open it up for a huge group of folks that are having a similar issue. So, and you already have that built-in passion, right? Because this is something that already has meaning for you, because the work is grueling at times. I mean, you often are denied. You often are challenged and questioned about the worth of your work. And so if you already have that inherent passion built in for it, the fire doesn't get burned out completely. The other end of that is make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Burnout is real.
Ooh, you speaking to me?
Yes, especially when you're taking on these heavy topics. Yes. And when it's personal for you, right? When you literally have skin in the game. you've got to be able to take some time to just push pause and remember that, oh, there's some good things in the world too.
Mhm.
You know, I have tailored my X feed, used to be Twitter, where I only get fuzzy animals and cross special relationships.
Ooh.
And so anytime I just need like a big jolt of happiness, I just open up X and kind of scroll through my little puppies and cats and kittens, and that gives me a little boost for the day. So just having those things built into your day where you say, I'm going to take a pause here and just do something for me,
Mm.
whether that's take a walk, listen to your favorite podcast, whatever it might be, but having that built in so that you are allowing yourself that refueling time because the work is long and it is grueling.
Mhm. Well, at this point, we're going to open it up, see if any students have any burning questions.
So I was curious, with having the organic growth between Pamplin and Race in the Marketplace, it seems like it really helps expand the bandwidth for you to pursue other opportunities and events. What are some, in addition to sponsoring RIM for summits such as this, what are other ways that Pamplin or other institutions might be able to support RIM?
So we are in talks with other institutions now, and one of the things that we've identified as a key need is infrastructure, right? So again, we're a small, mighty team, and we all have day jobs and other projects that we're working on, and so we're in the process of trying to identify a managing director that can kind of take on the kind of day-to-day answering emails, setting schedules, and all that fun stuff, and kind of long-term strategic planning. And so the more, and so we've been looking for grant money to make sure that we've got some seed money to start that, but how do we sustain that? Right. So great, we've got it maybe for the next year or two, but then what? And so we can certainly use it. And most grants that we've looked at don't necessarily apply for infrastructure building. They want you to do a project of some sort, which means, well, we don't have the bandwidth for another project. We need infrastructure so that we can do those projects. And so looking for folks that can specifically help us build that infrastructure would be helpful.
Mhm. Any other questions?
So, what are some, I guess, your future events that RIM and Pamplin have coming down the pipeline so that us who are advocating tech can attend?
Yeah, so we've got the next RIM Research Forum coming up in 2025, January 2025 in Cape Town, South Africa. So Pamplin is a primary sponsor of that. And so we'll certainly be working closely with each other to make sure that it's going to be another great event. And I'm sure it's going to be another great event. And yeah, we're in talks. I know there's been talked about maybe doing some work around curriculum building. That's another area that RIM's really interested in exploring more of because we do feel like that's another way that we can start to change the culture of how business thinks about critical research, how it thinks about race, and the intersection of the two. And so, yeah, we're certainly feeling out ways that we can broaden out the scope of our kind of product offerings in ways that make sense to both entities.
Yes.
So I'm curious, do you see in the future RIM being an organization that can help sponsor and publish student-led research or articles, whether it be directly through their colleges or through student organizations such as track?
We certainly see that we can be helpful with being a platform where undergraduates, graduate students, early stage faculty members can have a space to publish their work. And that would either be through our relationships with other journals, either through our conferences where you can publish through the convenings of the conference, or long term, we've talked about creating our own journal. And so having a space there we could have specific parts of that journal be dedicated to undergraduate work or graduate work. But yeah, definitely we see that as a space that we would like to fill and being able to support growing that area of undergraduate research that's critically from the critical perspective in that way.
So, since you've written the book, are there any new understandings or any new concepts that you've explored that maybe might not be in the book, but like have you like you've explored?
Well, This has certainly been influenced by the book and what came out of it, which was a kind of that global perspective of race, because the book definitely takes an international approach where we start to see how race is impacted both in Asia and on the continent of Africa and South America. And so one of the projects that I'm looking at with some other RIM members is the idea of Black joy, and not just from a US perspective, but from a global perspective. When I talked about there being these kind of unifying ways that we see race operating across the globe, and then there's particularities, trying to tease that out. When we think about Black joy, are there ways that we see it manifesting globally? And one of the reasons why we're going to South Africa is start to understand how we can see some very distinct differences in how Blackness is experienced there versus the US, and how there are very distinct similarities between those experiences. And so the book provided a sense of, there may be some ways where we can start to see connecting points with Black joy, and then there may be some ways that there's regional particularity that need to be lifted up. And so I'm interested to kind of explore that area to see, one, how does the marketplace respond to that? Because in the US, it's often co-opted and becomes a commodity. So we see a lot of times Black joy in commercials, but does that happen across the globe, or are there other ways that we see Black joy being circulated throughout those societies? So yeah, that's one way that at least the book is kind of influencing what's coming next.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kevin D. Thomas, everyone. Let's give him a warm, hokey thank you. Educator, activist scholar, and co-founder of the Race in the Marketplace Research Network. Thank you so much for coming to Blacksburg.
Thank you, Dr. Hall.